bad guys and rough state cannot serve to explain historical facts and provide the historical responsibility for the destruction of a state. The joint criminal intent existed, but it didn't proceed from Belgrade, however, nor did it exist in Belgrade at all. Quite the contrary. It existed through the joint forces of the secessionists, Germany and the Vatican, and also the rest of the countries of the European community and the United States. During my first appearance in this place, and then on several occasions after that, I questioned the legality of this so-called tribunal. During the trial, you have provided me with a lot of arguments in support of my position. I will not dwell on the lack of the legal basis for the establishment of this tribunal. I would just like to recall that the source of judicial power can only come from international treaties and not resolutions, as stated by the UN Secretary General himself in a statement to the Security Council on May 3rd, 1993. However, you owe a response to the international community of where does the right of the Security Council come to suspend legal treaties. We have the Geneva Conventions from 1949, as well as additional protocols to punish war crimes, which place the responsibility for trial of such cases on national courts. An international court can have authority only if it was created by a lege artis act and if it is of a general nature. This tribunal lacks both elements. The act of this establishment of this tribunal is of an individual nature. It's a political nature. The elementary legal principle is equality. So then we have the question, why were not courts formed for all the wars that are being waged throughout the war and that had been waged at least in the past decade of the 20th century, although there are no principled reasons for not doing something like that and to apply it to everybody if such a thing were legal. In other words, this tribunal represents the most serious form of discrimination against one country, and it is a violation of the protection against all forms of discrimination. At the very beginning, I requested that this institution uses its authority from Article 96 of the UN Charter and to ask the permission of the General Assembly and to ask the International Court of Justice, legally the highest judicial instance in the UN system, which is authorized to interpret the Charter and to provide its legal opinion on whether the resolutions of the Security Council establishing this tribunal were in accordance with the UN Charter or not. The fact that this tribunal has given it the right to decide for itself whether it was established in a legally valid way and then concluded, as could be expected, that it was done in a legal way, does not mean that this conclusion is correct or that it even had the right to reach such a conclusion. Namely, this so-called tribunal, just like any other tribunal, is not authorized to bring judgments on its own legality. That is why this decision is legally invalid. Courts are authorized to decide on their own authority on whether they are competent to decide on a certain question or not. However, the question of the jurisdiction of a court and the question of its legality are two separate issues. The question of legality has precedence over the question of authority, because if a court is not legal, then the question of its authority or jurisdiction is pointless. As opposed to the question of its own authority, no court can decide on its own legality, because by tradition it is not permissible to judge in one's own matter. Iudex in causa sua. Also, this illegal tribunal does not have the right to deprive persons before it from an answer of whether they are facing a legal or an illegal organ, particularly if there is a legally valid way to resolve this question, because the person in question then is denied justice, déni de justice, if this is not allowed to be answered.
Ali bojim se da
However, I'm afraid that the people in authority in this institution are aware that the International Court of Justice would be in accordance with the view of their previous president, Mohammed Bejawi, stated in his book, The New World Order and Control of the Legality of the Acts of the Security Council, where amongst the acts or the laws that he mentions as controversial, both resolutions referring to this tribunal are cited.
dakle nije ovaj tribunal
This tribunal is not an international tribunal, and it is not an independent organ as you wish to present it. Amongst the public, there has been ideological fiction. The international community, which is allegedly behind this tribunal, is actually a deception. The ideal to establish the tribunal came from Kinkel after he succeeded Genscher, the main criminal in the destruction of Yugoslavia. The idea was taken over by Madeleine Albright, and the costs of the preliminary activities as well as later activities were funded by the Soros Foundation, who also founded a coalition for international justice as an NGO in order to provide assistance to the tribunal. Assistance, please, I would like to place in quotes to these who are writing the transcript. These members and some other NGOs, some of whom today are working in this tribunal today, were engaged in 1992 in Bosnia and Herzegovina to gather the evidence on alleged crimes by Serbs. Albright presented this before the U.S. Congress, engaged different lobbyists and different media for the purpose of fabricating a certain image which would influence the public. Sometimes they have called her the mother of the tribunal. As for the authenticity of the evidence given by the NGOs, we can use a scandal about the false documents presented by representatives of those organizations, in which I was allegedly accused for alleged crimes in Kosovo. A journalist of the New York Times who wrote an article based on this false information was forced to resign for professional and ethical reasons.
imam čak ovdje i taj New York Times.
I have that issue of the New York Times here, but I don't have time to present it. The drafter of the statute, Michael Scharf of the tribunal, gave a very precise assessment of the tribunal. In an interview to the Washington Post on October 3rd, 1999, I quote, "The tribunal is a useful political channel which serves to diplomatically isolate rogue leaders and to strengthen political will in the world to apply sanctions and to enforce power," close of quote. In other words, the tribunal is an instrument of war and not of justice. This was confirmed in Globe and Mail, a Canadian magazine, by Marcus McGee, who stressed that the tribunal, I quote, "is a part of the NATO war strategy." So this is